Lex Gracie was just 15 years old when she escaped from her abusive parents and their house of horrors. She had spent years chained to her own bed, but she was the girl who escaped, and her escape led to the rescue of her siblings. In police reports and in the media, she was known as Girl A. When the story opens, many years have passed, and Lex is working as a lawyer. When Lex's mother dies, she's appointed executor to the will. She needs to track down her siblings as she tries to turn the House of Horrors into a place of hope. Throughout, she's supported by her younger sister Evie, the person she cares most about in the world. I was really looking forward to Girl A. It sounded like the kind of gritty, literary fiction I grew up with. Better yet, it was inspired by real-life stories, like the Turpin case, which I was really interested in. Unfortunately, I was left disappointed. Despite the intriguing premise and some really powerful moment-to-moment writing, the story as a whole dragged horribly. So what went wrong? Well, my analysis, as well as some spoilers, are ahead. The first issue for me was pacing. The first act has largely gone missing, and we have an inciting event right at the opening. Now, a fast start isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there just doesn't seem to be enough story to fill the next 11 hours. The story indulges heavily in flashbacks, and many of these feel like unnecessary filler. One of the worst offenders is an incredibly drawn-out retelling of how Lex's parents first met, which has no relevance to the rest of the plot. The second issue is that these multiple timelines we keep flashing back to can get really confusing. The ones set when Lex is a child work well, because they're genuinely interesting, and because the perspectives are so different, the switch is obvious. But when we get flashbacks to Lex being a slightly younger adult, it's difficult to follow, and I didn't find myself caring enough to make the effort. The third big issue is perspective. For most of the book, we see the story from Lex's limited point of view. That means we only know what she knows, which sets a good tone for a thriller. But in some of the flashbacks, we strangely switch to an omniscient perspective, where Lex is telling us things it doesn't seem she should know. This is really jarring. It's almost like these sections are left over from a previous draft of the book, where there was some kind of framing narrative to explain this. Then, when we're in the last 15% of the book or so, there's another jarring turn, where we discover Lex is also an unreliable narrator. Her little sister Evie has been dead all along, and most of their interactions have been imagined. It's another really jarring moment, and not in a good way. Unlike, say, Fight Club, where the similar reveal is really well foreshadowed and thematically pertinent, this just feels like a cheap trick. The fourth issue is that the book is a bit of a thematic mess. At the start, the main theme appears to be forgiveness. Then, it shifts the lasting effects of childhood trauma. Then, the nature of time and memory. And finally, feminism and toxic masculinity. These are all great themes for this type of story. The issue is that rather than being interwoven throughout, they just seem to pop up and then disappear again, with Lex's character contorted to accommodate them, making her feel contrived at times. Ultimately though, these four issues are overshadowed by, and probably stem from, a fifth. The book is just telling the wrong story. A common tip is that when you're planning a story, you should ask yourself, is this the most interesting time in my characters' lives? And if not, why aren't you telling that story instead? The story of Lex reconnecting with her siblings to decide what to do with a house is boring. Even Lex doesn't seem interested. She never really seems motivated by her main plot goal. The interesting story is the one that keeps getting flashed back to. The story of her childhood, of how her parents' abuse evolved over time, and of how she escaped. It's a really well-known anecdote that when Harper Lee was working on To Kill a Mockingbird, the original draft was set at a later point in time and only flashed back to the events of the main plot. She was advised to rewrite it and set the story in the timeline where the most interesting events were taking place. That instruction led to one of the greatest novels ever written, and I can't help but think it's a shame Abigail Dean didn't get the same good advice. While reading Girl A, I kept being reminded of another really great novel, Never Let Me Go, by Nobel Prize-winning author Kazuo Ishiguro. This could have served as a perfect template for how to tell the story of Girl A better. It's another coming-of-age tale about children with a tragic upbringing dealing with their past. Never Let Me Go starts off by giving us a glimpse of the protagonist as an adult, but it then quickly jumps back to their childhood and then tells the story of the most interesting time in that character's life in a straightforward linear structure. This means that when dramatic things happen, they feel like they're happening there and then. It feels weighty. There are stakes. The actual events of Never Let Me Go are less dramatic than those of Dall.E, but it feels more exciting to read. And when we catch back up with the timeline of the first chapter, there's still space for a weighty climax and resolution for the protagonist's adult self. I really believe that if Dall.E had been redrafted one last time to sort out these structural issues, it could have been another timeless classic. Just listen to these prose. Saviors came from the blackness, bearing water, blankets, bread, whispering in a strange language which I didn't understand. Sometimes it was Mother. I thought of how she loved us best when we were inside of her, silent and entirely hers, and I allowed her to care for me. Sometimes she brought us milk or scraps of food. She fed us by hand. Other times she brought a towel and a plastic bowl of water. She talked to herself, quietly, as if she too was a child. All the time the towel moved across my body, between the collarbone and the ribs, over the empty pockets of skin of my chest and buttocks, still distended, anticipating flesh, and down between my legs, where there was always a mess. My body was unable to stop its attempts to be human. In these moments, softened by her tenderness, I understood what defeat would feel like, not thinking of escape or protecting Evie. Just imagine beautifully written passages like that, if they were part of a novel structured to give them stakes and weight. The closing lines of the book, which I won't spoil here, are also astonishingly beautiful and resonant. They left me longing for the book which Dall.E could have been. So would I recommend Dall.E? On balance, unfortunately, probably not. If you're an aspiring author and you want to analyse it, there's a lot to learn, both good and bad. But as a general reader, it would probably be a disappointment. If you're looking for some good, gritty, literary fiction with elements of a coming-of-age story, try To Kill a Mockingbird or Never Let Me Go instead. This is a brand new channel, so if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so I know to keep producing review videos like this one.